Hello everybody, this is David again and welcome to Almost a Country, a series in which I scrape rust of some ancient swords, try to determine ranks and obsolete uniforms, and most importantly, try to share with you my love for failed attempts to declare a country. Thanks to everybody still waiting for me to finish this third episode. Today we're going to be looking at the almighty Don Host Republic. This almost country has a bit of an odd name, and that's because it has its origins in perhaps the most unique people in the world. How the Cossacks came to be is disputed to this day. Several sources say that the original Cossacks were adventurers deliberately living on the wild fringes of the Russian Empire in the early Middle Ages. 14th century documents from Italian trading outposts on the shore of the Black Sea, present-day Georgia, used the term Cossack to describe a group of marauding bandits who raided their operations. Most historians seem to agree that Cossacks formed by a natural social blending of what remained of the Turkic people who came west with the Golden Horde, and small folk who came south to colonize this land in the name of several Russian principalities and duchies. This often happened when the small folk deserted the Russian lands in an attempt to escape their predetermined social structure and the particularly harsh Russian serfdom. This has become something of a tradition with the Cossacks. Even after their incorporation into the Russian Empire, they were free men, and anyone whom they accepted as one of their own was a free man as well, regardless of the newcomer's history. This extended to women too, making the Cossacks one of the first communities where women held the equal rights to men. Their lands were free from any overlord, and they enjoyed many generous privileges, such as not having to pay taxes, and they were accountable only to the Tsar. One might think this would make the Cossack lands a natural destination for every runaway serf, but the Cossack way of life was definitely not for everybody. Cossack people lived on the borderlands of the empire and lived simple, hard lives. Their communities followed a hardline militaristic structure, with the way of the warrior determining most aspects of everyday life. This part also equally extended to women. They lived off and protected the lands too remote or too dangerous for standard imperial armies to control, and earned a special place in Russian military structure, carrying the same cavalry tradition up to the Second World War. In today's thinking, we often differentiate between military servicemen and civilians. To a Cossack, however, there was, and to this day is, no such distinction. Their way of life became an often romanticized part of Russian traditional folklore and could be seen as the Eastern counterpart to Western knightly chivalry tradition. In more modern times, the Cossacks heavily inspired, for example, the Fremen from Frank Herbert's Dune series, or the Night's Watch from the George R.R. Martin books The Song of Ice and Fire. Cossack communities formed larger organizational bodies, called armies or hosts. Some of the most important hosts of the Russian Empire were the hosts of Zaporozhye, Don, Kuban, Terek, Yaik, and Astrakhan. But there were many more. Don Cossacks inhabited southwestern borderlands of the empire, containing present-day cities of Rostov, Volgograd, Voronezh, the former capital of Cherkassk, and the later and larger capital of Novocherkassk, New Cherkassk. By the time World War I started, the Don host was the largest of the Cossack armies in existence. They were mostly deployed on the German and Austrian fronts. While it could be said that the Cossacks were born and raised for war. The war certainly didn't suit their comrades. The year 1917 marks the outbreak of the Russian Civil War, with numerous communist uprisings destabilizing the already fragile country, eventually resulting in the creation of Soviet Russia, which quickly sued for peace with the Central Powers. Those of you who watched my first video discussing the Lemko Republic know that the communist uprisings were in fact fabricated by German imperial diplomacy, and thus it makes sense that the Soviet delegates agreed to quite shocking demands of the Germans. These included granting many former Russian imperial territories independence, and that German or Ottoman proxy governments would rule over these from now on. Or that the Central Powers would occupy over 150,000 square kilometers with over 50% of Russian industry, 90% of all the Russian coal supplies, and 30% of the entire Russian population. This came to be known as the Brest-Litovsk Treaty. It was to be a grand victory for the Central Powers, a payoff for all the planning on the Eastern Front. However, it proved to be a logistical nightmare. Some of the territories the Soviets ceded were in fact controlled by the conservative White Movement in open war with the Soviets. Some of the territories proved to be too vast to control or govern, leading to many territories rejecting the treaty and declaring independence to rule themselves. Eventually, even the proxies Germans have set up on the Eastern Front became unsatisfied with the outcome of the war, and many factions across Ukraine and Soviet Russia grown gradually more hostile to the Central Powers. Scores of Soviet and other republics rose all over the captured lands, some entering the Russian Civil War and declaring for the Reds, some declaring for the Whites, some choosing to stay neutral, some choosing to fight the Germans, some choosing to cooperate with them instead. Eventually, the communist narrative spread more and more among the German fighting force, and the Zimmermann scheme to install communists in Russia eventually backfired in 1918's and 1919's revolts in Germany itself, which gave birth to Adolf Hitler, as we know him today. Let's get back to the Cossacks. The Don Cossack host, as an organization, immediately aligned themselves with the Whites and entered the Civil War. With the Don host forces still tied up on the fronts, however, the communist revolutionaries seized control over their homeland, and the Soviet Republic of the Don was declared in Rostov in March 1918. This was an attempt made by Soviet Russia to take back a slice of what the Central Powers took from them during the Brest-Litovsk peace. The already thinly spread German forces sent their troops to quell the new Red Republic, and on May 1st, 1918, the Germans have regained Rostov, but not for long. 5 days later, General Ataman Pyotr Krasnov arrived at Rostov with the Don host at his back, and the position of the region shifted once again. The Cossacks have finally returned home. Soon after, the Republic of the Don, or the Republic of the Almighty Don Host, was declared. Pyotr Krasnov had two clear objectives: to consolidate control over the region and to create a legislative outline for the new country. In terms of the latter, the closest thing Cossacks have had to a parliament was established in Novocherkassk. the Circle of Salvation of the Don, a general assembly of Cossacks which convened soon to solve various pressing issues of the population while the Cossack army assumed control over the rest of the territory. The legislature introduced by the Circle was very similar to that of the former Russian Empire. New currency, the Don ruble, was issued, and the Cossack parliament established active commissions to examine damage done by the hostile forces to institutions and settlements in order to start mending this damage. The Circle of Salvation then began to restore and enforce the authority of civil structures such as district offices, settlement foremanship, police and gendarmerie, judicial courts and other such institutions. To counter the Bolshevik propaganda coming from revolutionary-controlled territories, the Cossacks established the Don Department of Awareness, employing local scholars and intelligence to mount a propaganda campaign of their own. This agency focused mostly on promotion of internal reconstruction and stabilization efforts. Their other purpose was, of course, gathering intel on the population, their general opinion of the government, and possible revolutionary sentiments. Overall, it seemed that Krasnov had laid foundations for a functional country, opposing the criticism that the White armies and their leaders spared little effort governing their territories. But then again, Krasnov's intentions with the region were a bit different from the intentions of the other White Army generals. In his speech to the Circle of Salvation, Krasnov declared, in a true Cossack fashion, his intention for the Don army to maintain its territory as a sovereign nation, and while supporting the White movement with the might of their own, to eventually be free of Russian overlordship. This Krasnov's decision can be actually traced to that fateful revolutionary night in St. Petersburg, when Bolshevik revolutionaries captured the imperial palace, which was supposed to be defended by the Don Cossack conscripts under Krasnov's command. Some sources say that Krasnov was very unhappy with how the monarchy behaved towards his people, and that the results of that night were much less a failed defense and much more a deliberate unreliability. To pursue his goal of an independent Cossack state, where the Cossack traditional military structure and the government would be one and the same, he reached out to some of his old friends. Ataman Alexander Filimonov, who started his own Cossack republic in Kuban, and Ataman Pavlo Skoropadsky, leader of the Ukrainian People's Republic founded and supported by the German Empire. Together, these three men declared their countries to be joined in a loose federation and the intention of remaining independent after order has been restored to the Russian Empire. However, there was one man who made sure this was not to be. Considered to be one of the most ruthless, ambitious, and the most successful of the White generals, Anton Denikin viewed actions of Kuban and Don Cossacks as high treason. As the acting commander of the White Army in the Russian South, he ironically saw this disunity as a very harmful factor to the overall agenda of the White movement. A point of view that proved to be correct, but ignored by himself in the end. The Kuban Republic's inability to contribute to the war effort led Denikin to capture its capital, execute the local Cossack leadership, and install a firm, centralized authority over Kuban. The Don Republic was far more capable in this regard, but Denikin and Krasnov were bitter political opponents. When Denikin called for the great push on Moscow, and the operation failed, Denikin partly blamed Krasnov for their defeat. Therefore, Krasnov resigned as Ataman of the Don Cossack army, and by extent the Don Republic as well. The new ataman, General African Bogoyevsky, worked much closer with Denikin's Central South Russia command, and was ideologically far closer to Denikin himself. Krasnov, who had viewed Bogoyevsky as a friend, never forgave the new ataman for this and saw it as a personal betrayal even long after the war ended. Generally, the thought of an independent Don Cossack nation with its own identity started and lived in the person of Ataman Pyotr Krasnov, and when he left, the ideal left with him. The late Don Republic was simply an extension of the South Russian command, and when in 1920 Denikin accepted his defeat at the hands of the Bolsheviks and fled, the Don Republic packed its things and attempted to flee as well, in the form of the many Cossack veterans, expats and émigrés who started to fill the various social clubs in Paris, London and Beograd, living out their days by nostalgically dreaming of their lost fatherland that would never be the same again. Not ever. This identity breakdown of the Cossacks was clear from the lives of those living in exile. The Cossack elite were limited to a bunch of inactive dreamers, while the common folk of the Cossacks often made living as circus attractions, demonstrating the extraordinary skills on horseback that were their birthright. For most of them, this was the end. But not for Ataman Pyotr Krasnov, the Cossack Republic's founder and former leader. In exile, he re-emerged from obscurity and started to call Russian banners yet again. Even as the Communist Party was in the middle of consolidating power of the newly formed Soviet Union, Krasnov tried to gather fighting men from the refugee ranks and conduct an invasion and continue the civil war that already ended for most. The white émigré elite, impersonated by Baron Wrangel, General Denikin and Ataman Bogoyevsky, refused to restart the war, at least with the current state of things, and limited themselves to establishment of support organizations with the purpose of keeping the whites ready for a potential chance to strike in the future. Pyotr Krasnov wished to strike immediately, and with the little support he could get, he founded the Brotherhood of Russian Truth, an exile secret service dedicated to preparing the regions of Russia where the White Army had been the strongest for their eventual military return. The Brotherhood was eventually unsuccessful after Soviet agents masterfully infiltrated other paramilitary organizations of the Whites and caused the Brotherhood heavy casualties during a surprise strike which seemed to be a friendly fire. Krasnov would grab another opportunity towards the end of the Second World War, when he joined and led Cossack regiments of the SS, organized by Nazi Germany. After the war was concluded, Pyotr Krasnov was handed over to Soviet forces, sentenced for collaboration and hanged. The exact moment of the Don Cossack Republic's demise is hard to determine. For some, it is the end of the Russian Civil War. For some, it's General Krasnov's execution. Either way, these strange and beautiful free people of the Don survive and preserve most of their traditions to this day. It is the fate of many almost countries in this series to be carried on the shoulders of one person while being forgotten by the peoples they claimed to do it all for. And it will be the case of our next episode as well, where we will cover perhaps the most unique country yet. The only country in history the poets reviewed as a literary piece in intellectual magazines. The magnificently lyrical Italian Regency of Carnaro. And you really want to hear about that, people. See you there. Goodbye.